AI is going to change the world. What if it falls into the wrong hands? Even worse, what if it's already in them? Hello there, you 6.4 million awakening wonders. Thanks for joining me on this voyage to truth and freedom. Together, we will cultivate our own consciousness that we may challenge any emergent intelligence that will damn us to penury and slavery. Turn on the notification bell and subscribe right now. We make this content every single day, and the algorithm will direct you into the annals and avenues of the mainstream, where you'll be fed thin gruel and kept dumb, whipped like an orphan and sent to bed without any food. We will nourish you here with content every single day. You'll only get it if you subscribe and turn on the notification bell. You know what they're like. I had an amazing conversation about AI with Bari Weiss of the Twitter Files. She knows how this stuff's running, where this stuff's going, as much as anyone can know. Stay with us. Let me know if there's anything I missed. Enjoy the conversation. Let me know what you think in the chat.
I had on Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, which is the company that runs ChatGPT. And the title of the podcast, I think, summarizes where a lot of people are thinking this goes. You know, is AI the end of the world, or is it the dawn of a new one? There's a tremendous amount of hyperbole going on around this new technology. Some are comparing it to fire. That's Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google. Others are comparing it to agriculture, the wheel, electricity, the Gutenberg press, you name it. Here's what I know. In the past decade, Russell, as you've surely watched, crypto is the thing that has been absolutely hyped. This was the thing that was going to get rid of state currency. It was going to get rid of the dollar bill. It was going to change the world. It was going to democratize money. But my wife was just in Austin at a crypto conference, and you still pay for the swag in dollar bills. In other words, people are still sort of casting about for the use case of the thing that was meant to change the world as we know it. Think about ChatGPT in comparison, right? That came out basically a week ago. Something like a few months ago, ChatGPT 4 was unveiled. 100 million people are using that app every day, and it's already changing the way that people work, the way they do research, the way they cheat on tests in college. News organizations have announced that they're getting rid of certain jobs because they're already outsourcing them to this technology. So it's already proven its use, which is extremely exciting and also extremely unnerving. There's an economist that I love named Tyler Cowen who writes this incredible blog, Marginal Revolution, if your listeners aren't aware of it. And he had this incredibly succinct, excellent post about this, where he basically says, as much as we have believed that the internet was a seismic technological revolution, the truth is that most of us that are alive, save very, very old people that lived through, World War II and the advent of nuclear weapons, we really haven't lived through a fundamental technological revolution. We haven't lived through what he calls moving history, where we're actually feeling like the tectonic plates shift. This is that thing. And as human beings who are only able to think so far into the future, it's really scary. But probably the cavemen who watched their neighbor invent fire felt the same way. They probably thought, holy shit, this thing allows us to cook food and stay warm, but also holy shit, someone can come and burn our whole village to the ground. In other words, every single time this new technology comes into being, there's a kind of moral panic around it, right? There's this really amazing newsletter called Pessimist Archive, and they keep track of the panics that are the reaction to new technology. I read one the other day where it was like, it was a poem that they unearthed from 250 BC, freaking out about the sundial. Right? There's articles about, the extinction of the slide rule and how the calculator is going to ruin education forever for kids. For people that were living in 1600s in Central Europe, the printing press probably meant to them war and bloodshed. To us, it meant the advent of the Industrial Revolution and the Scientific Revolution. So my feeling about this new technology, sorry to go on about this, I'm really excited about it because I feel like it's huge, is it's not a question of yes or no. It's going to happen. The question is, who is going to do it and what are the guardrails going to be around it? And those, I think, are the real pressing questions that some of the smartest people in the world, way smarter than me, are grappling with right now. One of them being the CEO of OpenAI, Sam Altman.
It's interesting because when you talk about regulation with something like this, it can sometimes seem to be at odds with where we might stand elsewhere on the subject of censorship. But I've heard people say that if this isn't like that, Elon Musk, for example, said it ought to be regulated and it's not regulated. And now I know that when people talk about regulation elsewhere within social media, the problem ends up being that it's not about regulation of monopolies, it's regulation of, it ends up being censorship of free speech, essentially. I'm fascinated, Barry, to hear you say that this is a seismic shift and it is epochal, and that you don't think that, oh, everyone having a phone in their pocket represents that, or the ability to be contacted the whole time. You think this is beyond that, because this is beyond utility, because it can actually transform. It's not like, well, it's just a tool we use. It can become a tool that uses us. Is this what you're saying?
I mean, that is what I'm increasingly convinced by. Don't get me wrong. I am not a futurist. I am not a technologist. I lost when everyone was freaking out about Bitcoin and crypto in the beginning of in the beginning of the pandemic, I went and bought $10,000 and then promptly lost my password forever, thus losing the $10,000. I'm not like a sophisticated technologist. What I know is, having spent a little bit of time with ChatGPT, it is eerie the way that it can imitate human intelligence. And far be it for me to suggest that the phone in my pocket that contains more computing power than what sent the rockets to the moon. I mean, of course I'm blown away by it. I'm just saying that this thing, its very, very short few months, has already proven to be extraordinarily transformative. And so I'm not saying that the internet and the fact that we're talking through a screen right now and I'm in LA and you're in the UK, it's unbelievable. I'm just suggesting that this has the ability to be perhaps even more unbelievable. And people that are more sophisticated than me are suggesting so. And so I think it's incumbent upon all of us to learn about it. Now, as for the question of regulation and censorship, that really, really scares me. I mean, go in there and ask other people have done this, but go in there and type something controversial into ChatGPT. Type in, tell me about Mao. Type in, tell me about Jordan Peterson. You'll immediately see that because all technology is ultimately created by human beings, that it has biases. And unlike Twitter, right, where we could go into the archive, because Elon Musk, allowed journalists into the archive, of course, through the Twitter files, we could see the choices they were making. This thing is built on a text corpus of billions and billions of texts, articles, books, documents, lyrics. It's much harder, I think, it's going to be much harder to sort of ascertain the biases, because you're not like, it's just different. The scale of it is completely different. And I think that's really worrisome. The other thing that's worrisome, as we saw in the Twitter files, the amazing Twitter files hearings where Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger went before Congress, and we saw, an incredible display, let's say, by some American politicians who didn't know what Substack was, who asked if me and Matt and Schellenberger were in a threesome. I mean, it was incredible. Like, do we really trust the people who don't know what Substack is to regulate, ChatGPT and OpenAI? Like, I don't even know if they know what a modem is or know how the internet works. And so that, I think, is really worrisome to me. And so there are people who are suggesting other kinds of, Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, suggests that maybe he should be the head ultimately of OpenAI. Maybe that's a position that should be democratically elected, because that's how significant and important it will be. So, the jury's out. But when I look at the people who are in Washington and their average age, frankly, the idea of them regulating this technology is worrisome to me.
Yeah, that is cause for concern. When we have in the media landscape cozy relationships, as evidenced between the recent White House Correspondents' Dinner, and then adversarial, aggressive, punitive relationships, as the aforementioned Taibbi Schellenberger congressional hearing suggests. What do you think this tells us about the shifting landscape between the media and the powerful? In particular, I'm noting Matt Taibbi's IRS visit, the threat with jail for perjury or whatever. How do you feel, Barry, operating in a comparable space, and both of Matt Taibbi being a peer and indeed colleague of yours?
I think it is the job of journalists to hold power to account, and do that even when it's politically inconvenient for your side. I think that Matt Taibbi, Michael Schellenberger, me, we're never going to be invited to the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And I'm okay with that, because when I became a journalist, I didn't do it for the money. I didn't do it for the accolades. And I didn't do it so that I could, drink champagne next to powerful people. I did it because it's a vocation that allows you to pursue your curiosity, and in which you get, a salary to take your flashlight and look into the darkest corners, into the kind of corners that the powers that be don't want you to look. So, when I see the IRS seemingly being weaponized against someone like Matt Taibbi, I think that is something that every single journalist in this country, whether they work for an independent site, whether they write for a Substack, whether they work at the Washington Post or the New York Times, should be absolutely up in arms about that. And I think it tells you something really concerning about the state of the legacy press in this country, that, the Wall Street Journal thankfully had an editorial, but there should have been editorials about that visit in every single newspaper across the West, in my view.
Why isn't Biden likely to conduct primary debates? I think many of us would be interested to hear debates between, for example, Robert F. Kennedy and Biden, and Marianne Williamson's doing pretty well also. Why is the Democrat Party becoming so censorial, so afraid of conversation? What's going on, Bari?
What do you look, tells you a lot about the popularity of Joe Biden among voters that Marianne Williamson is polling at something like 9 or 10%, and RFK Jr. who announced like 2 weeks ago, I think, is polling at something like 20% already. Who knows what will happen when Gavin Newsom, California governor, maybe is reportedly maybe going to get into the race at some point. People realize that Joe Biden, though he won the last election, is getting slipped the questions in press conferences before, to sort of be prepped. He's someone that they're sort of, I don't want to say hiding, but trying to protect from the probing questions of the press as much as possible. Why isn't he doing a debate? Well, for all of those reasons. How do you think he would fare in a debate against Marianne Williamson, RFK, and to say nothing of other people that might join the race?
So essentially, you have someone in a position of power that's being protected. You have a relationship between the mainstream press and the government that is consensual, as we saw with the recent reporting around the Pentagon Papers Part 2, that the content of the leaks was ignored. You had the ludicrous spectacle of Biden saying that we must protect the free press and that journalism is not a crime, while Assange is still away in a maximum security prison. And adding to this potentially unprecedented tool that we were previously discussing, which will ultimately, I suppose, end up in the hands of the powerful. And it seems, based on what you're saying about the inflections that AI already bears culturally, that it's a system of, and of course we know from the Twitter files what the relationship is between big tech and the Democrat Party in particular. Of course, I'm sure they would be flexible depending on which of those two parties were in power. It seems that the potential to govern the population is about to become I would say, what do I want to say, sort of overwhelming with these new tools. It's possible that freedom could be further eroded. So really, at a point where we ought be insisting on new independent movements, a point where we should be insisting on transparency, there is more surveillance, militarization of the police, more protest laws, and inability to conduct public discourse by the most powerful person in the world. What do you imagine is most immediately required, Bari?
What I think is most immediately required, and what I see already happening, and I guess this is the silver lining, is, look at both of us and in this moment right now, right? I don't even know how big your audience is at this point. It's astronomical. Here I am thinking that I was going to be, I spent my career in the legacy press, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, left the New York Times in 2020 for reasons maybe we can discuss, had no plan, had barely had a credit card, to say nothing of being an entrepreneur. That was like the furthest thing from my mind. And now I'm building a media company and I have 20 people working with me. So the great news is that the technological revolution we're living through, yes, can be used in extraordinarily oppressive ways, and it can also be democratizing. It's like all technology it's neutral. It can be used for good or bad, like fire, like the printing press, like the computer, like the iPhones in our pocket, right? And so while I think we should be concerned. And while I think this technology, AI, as we were talking about before, has the potential to be the big one, so to speak, I think that, if the past is prelude, it can be used in both ways. And so am I worried that you can go right now and create a conversation between the two of us, as someone did between Joe Rogan and Sam Altman, and created an episode of the Joe Rogan Experience that looked kind of like them and sounded kind of like them? Yeah, that really worries me when I think about actual disinformation, not what people want to believe is disinformation. Very concerning to me. But there's also incredible things that are going to come from it. So this is something that I'm watching more as a journalist, wanting to track it, wanting to understand it, wanting to understand who the players are, what their motivations are. Did the people that signed that letter, including Elon Musk and Steve Wozniak and others, calling for a 6-month pause in the advent of increased technology, of increased AI capabilities beyond ChatGPT? Did they sign that letter because they're pure of heart? Did they sign that letter because they want to catch up to the competition? Like, what are the motivations? What are driving people? And by the way, what's driving other countries? What's driving China? Where are they in terms of AI capabilities? These are the kind of questions that I think are going to be driving the next years of our life, the next years of stories. And it's one that I'm following incredibly, incredibly closely as a journalist above anything else.
Barry, I'm so grateful to you for asking these questions. I mean, I admire incredibly what you've done and the organization that you're evidently building, not to mention your ability, along with your wife, to expertly manage this child through the night in ways that seem to me to be unprecedented. And I think what's interesting also about what you're saying is that you are journaling what's happening. But increasingly, I think it's likely that to become a legitimate journalist is to become a de facto activist. And perhaps this is something that began with the Greenwald and Assange. And certainly it seems likely, due to the ongoing increase of censorship, to be a necessity that if you're going to tell the truth, you are an enemy of the powerful. So, but I'm glad that we at least have an allegiance. But of course, I'll give you the chance to respond.
Yeah, I think. Look, I'm old school. I think the job of a journalist, there are different roles in the world, right? There's the job of the advocate, there's the job of the columnist, there's the job of there's room for activists, there's room for all of these things. I think the way to do journalism that maintains integrity and maintains the trust of people has to hew to sort of old school rules that, frankly, a lot of the legacy press has turned their back on, right? The thing that used to happen at the New York Times was very clear. If a certain op-ed, and I was an op-ed editor there for years, and then also wrote my own columns, if an op-ed sort of hewed to the ideological narrative, if an op-ed argued that Donald Trump was a moral monster that had to be taken down, if an op-ed claimed that, Joe Biden was the savior of the world, we could go on and on and on. You know what the arguments are. It would sort of sail into the paper. And arguments that contradicted that, arguments that complicated it, those were ones that sort of were subjected to a much, much, much more rigorous test. In other words, and I think that was to the detriment of the audience and to the reader. And I think that, when you think about the old manifesto of the New York Times, the idea of all the news that's fit to print, and the way that it sort of has transformed, and many other papers as well, to all the news that fits the narrative. I just think that there is a huge, wide open space for people that are actually interested in treating readers like adults, that are actually interested in treating listeners as sophisticated people that can make their own decisions, not just shoving propaganda down their throat. And so that's what we're about at the Free Press. We're about telling honest stories. We're about telling the truth about the world as it actually is, not as we wish it to be. And we just put a special emphasis on stories that are either ignored or misconstrued by the mainstream press. And God knows there are a lot of those these days.
Well, what did you think about that conversation? Is Bari Weiss on it? Is Bari Weiss's approach to media the correct approach? Is this the direction we should all be heading in? If you enjoyed this video, have a look at either of these. Turn on the notification bell and subscribe right now. We make this content every day, and plus we stream every day on Rumble at these times. More important than any of that is that you please stay free.